Hi guys, I'm Karen Rice and welcome to my channel. This tutorial is all about an alternative to traditional watercolour framing, and I did publish a tutorial recently all about this subject, and many of you gave me lots of advice in the comment section. So this is a kind of an updated tutorial using some of that advice, and I also include how to attach a frame, wooden frame, to a floater frame to really give your watercolor paintings that modern look. So I really hope you're going to enjoy this tutorial. Let's get started. So here are the essential materials that I'm going to be using, and for a full list of all the materials I'm using in this tutorial, please see the description below. This is the wooden panel I'm going to be using. It's 8 by 10 inches. I'm just going to remove the cellophane. For all the materials I'm using, please see the description below, but it's quite a sturdy sort of panel here, untreated wood. And I'm going to use a sandpaper block. You can just use sandpaper sheets. I'm using Gamblin cold wax medium for the final finish and protection. You could use Dorland wax medium or an acrylic varnish. And I'm using an acrylic matte medium here to actually stick the watercolor painting to the wooden frame. You could use Mod Podge or another quality adhesive. I'm using Kamar Varnish, and it's a really good varnish for oils, watercolors and acrylics, and it has a non-yellowing protection. It's acid free and it allows you to rework after use. And you can see the back here, it gives you full instructions on how to use the varnish, and I'll talk about this later in the tutorial. I'm also going to use a primer, and that's to give the painting extra protection from the wooden frame. And you can actually use a very good quality white matte emulsion as well if you don't want to go out and buy this especially. So I'm using a roller. You don't actually have to have a roller. You could actually press down with your fingertips. I'll talk more about that later. I'm also using a craft knife to trim my painting. A large brush, an old brush will do. I'm also using white acrylic paint, but you could use another colour. And also a paper trimmer, but you could also use a scissors. I'm also using a cutting mat here, and you may be able to find an alternative to that as long as it protects the actual surface that you're using when you're using a craft knife. And I'm using some Velcro dots here, and I'll talk more about those later on in this tutorial. And finally, I'm going to be using a floater frame. It's another way of framing your panels once you have finished attaching your paintings to them as well. It gives your painting a bit more protection and a lovely modern look. This is the watercolour painting that I'll be using for this demonstration, and the abstract tutorial is available on my YouTube channel, and a link for the tutorial can be found in the description below. So I've taken my painting outside. You need a well ventilated area, spraying the varnish about 12 inches away horizontally and then vertically. You can apply as many coats as you like, and it dries within 15 minutes. Please follow all manufacturing instructions on the back of the can. And thank you to Beverly for your comment on YouTube reminding me that Angela Fair varnished her painting before mounting it on the wooden frame for extra protection. Next, I'm going to use the primer, and I'm just applying this now with a large flat synthetic brush, just applying that there. I'm going to give it a couple of coats, and I'm going to let it dry in between for 24 hours. You don't have to do this stage, it's just for added protection. I'm also going to prime the edges as well, again for extra protection but also for aesthetics, because I will be painting the edges of the panel later in this tutorial. And this again is in response to the comments in the YouTube video where many of you suggested painting the edges of the panel for aesthetic reasons. I'm going to allow this first layer to dry. So I'm just applying the second layer now after 24 hours, and it really does give it that added protection between the actual wooden frame and your watercolour painting. And I'm going to allow this to dry now for another 24 hours. So going back to my watercolour painting now, it is a little bit bigger than the actual wooden panel, but I've decided to actually crop the right hand side of it just here, and I might actually make this little offcut into a card at a later stage. So I'm using my paper trimmer now just to trim the painting and just making sure I line it up. And you really do need to make sure that you've got overhang on each side of your painting so you don't cut too short, so your painting won't be too small for the panel. So I'm just making sure that I've got plenty of painting left on each side there. You may want to actually use a pencil and a ruler to get exact measurements. I tend to sometimes just go for it. But one thing to keep in mind is measure twice, cut once. So here is my painting, and I'm just going to get the wooden frame and just make sure, using my fingertips, make sure that the painting is actually on the edge of the wooden frame and that it fits, and I don't actually have any white border on there either. So, and I've got some overhang as well, so I'm just double checking with my fingertips to make sure that it fits correctly. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to apply the acrylic medium to the wooden frame. I'm going to use a large brush to paint this on, and really make sure you paint right up to the edge here. So when you actually stick your painting on there, it's the corners sometimes that you have to watch out for. So just giving it a final sort of blend here with my brush before I apply the painting. Here is the painting. And for extra security, I'm just going to put a little bit of the acrylic medium on the back of the painting, and I'm going to use the same brush, the large brush, to apply the medium, and again painting right up to the edges and the corners. And now stick the painting to the frame and make sure there's an even amount of overhang. So you've got, with your fingertips, make sure that all of the painting is on the frame. And then you can roll it on to really secure the painting to the wooden frame. If you don't have a roller, place some paper towel over the top of the painting, then press firmly with your fingertips. The paper towel will protect the painting from any marks. Take your time doing this and really make sure you pay attention to the edges and the corners as well, pressing down firmly. I'm going to apply a bubble wrap sheet. Actually, you can use plastic or a paper towel and place it over the top of the painting to protect it. And then place some large books or a heavy object on top and allow to set for 24 hours. Then remove the books. It's like the big reveal here. So I'm just going to remove the bubble wrap now. So here's the painting, and it is stuck nice and firmly to the frame. And I'm using my cutting mat now. Really make sure that it's perfectly clean so no marks get on the painting. So turning the painting and frame over now for trimming, using my craft knife, and I'm cutting the paper that's overhanging the edge of the board now. I'm using a cutting mat here underneath to protect my table surface, and sometimes you have to sort of swipe twice with the blade, and again make sure the blade is not blunt because sometimes it can tear your paper. And do this each side till you remove all the overhanging edge paper. What's good about the frame is that your hands are protected here, but if you are using sharp objects, please be careful. So here is the painting attached to the frame. What I'm going to do now is I'm using a sandpaper block, and I'm just going to smooth out the edges. So I'm just going to go each side, rubbing sort of quite gently at first, and just really smoothing out those edges, and I will be painting those edges afterwards, so I don't want any lumps and bumps there. So take your time, and once you're finished, use a cloth to remove any particles of dust. So I'm going to use the cold wax medium here to apply to the painting now. This is for extra protection, water resistancy, and a matte finish. Now you can use acrylic varnish to actually varnish the painting at this stage as well for extra protection and finish. So there's some good ones out there, and you can use satin, matte or high gloss varnish for whatever sort of finish you require for your painting, and it's a good way of experimenting. But as you can see here, I'm applying liberally with my gloved hand. I didn't really want to apply it with my fingertips here. and I'm trying to get all the corners as well. Make sure I really apply it liberally here. And what I'm doing now is just using a paper towel just to take off a little bit of the excess wax before I buff it. And I'm going to allow about 15 minutes to allow this sort of wax to sort of sit on top of the painting there. So I'm buffing now with my paper towel. You can use a clean cloth and just work in sort of circular motions, working that wax until it becomes smooth, and you can even see a soft sheen even though it's supposed to be matte. Just working on the edges, all the little parts of it. And I have to say, this is quite enjoyable because you can sort of see it come to life in a way, and you can stop when you can feel a real smoothness on the surface. So I'm just giving it one last little buff and just making sure that no paint comes off as well. I've checked my paper towel, it's perfectly clean. So I'm going to paint the wooden edges now, something that I didn't do before, but many of you suggested it would be a good idea for presentation purposes. So I'm using some white acrylic paint here, but you can use whatever colour you fancy. It could be something to match the painting or the walls in your house as well, again for presentation purposes. So I'm using a synthetic brush and I'm applying the white titanium acrylic paint here. I'm carefully working my way round each of the sides with this first coat of acrylic, and then I'm going to allow that coat to dry and apply a second coat to the edges so that white looks really bright and opaque. I'm going to allow 24 hours for the paint to dry. And for added protection, I'm actually going to varnish the edges using a satin acrylic varnish. This was the varnish that I had to hand, but if you've got a matte or a gloss varnish, any of those will do. So I'm just carefully painting around each of the edges, a thin coat of varnish, and I'm going to apply 2 coats and allow 24 hours between coats before I apply the next layer. So I'm applying another thin layer here for added protection and presentation. So here is my painting. The edges have dried now, and I love this sort of modern look to it. So it is thoroughly protected and presented well, ready for hanging. And as promised, in this next section, I'm going to show you an easy way of attaching this to a floater frame. So I'm using a white floater frame and it fits a 10 by 8 wooden panel, and I will put a link in the description of where you can purchase these floater frames and of course the wooden panels. So I'm going to use Velcro double-sided adhesive dots, and this is to attach the painting to the frame. So we've got the hook and the loop Velcro dots here. I'm going to push them both together and press them firmly onto each of the corners of the wooden frame. Really press down hard so you've got a sticky side on the top there as well. So I'm just going to put also some in the middle of each of the sides as well, so you've really got lots of sort of security here. And I'm going to then place the wooden panel inside the floater frame, really sort of pressing down hard to make sure that the sticky side really sticks to the frame. Really sort of press down to make sure it's securely stuck. And for added security, I'm giving it a good shake upside down to make sure that the painting and frame does not fall out of your picture frame. So do check that before you hang your picture. So here is my picture hung on the wall, and I'm really pleased with it. It really has that modern look. So I really hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you have any questions, please put those in the comments section. And if you'd like to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe to my channel where you'll get updates of my latest tutorials. And if you'd like to learn more about watercolor painting and get access to my weekly exclusive tutorials, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? Details about the membership can be found in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Happy painting or happy framing. Bye for now.